Once I got into the UK, I didn't have a job. So all the money I had with me were from savings that I got in Romania through playing. I remember I had a MacBook Pro with me, and that's what I had, and a bag of clothes. I like to dream about what is going to happen in the next month or in the next year. Do things in parallel. You can do things at the same time. You don't necessarily need to focus in only one direction. You can do multiple things at the same time and see what works. Because in order to become somebody, you need to have different experiences. And sometimes those experiences make you a very unique person that could make a difference in the world. And now you have a mixture of skills that you can use to... I had to find a way to make some money. I saw that there's a struggle in the podcasting industry. I decided to build a tool that is, and I realized, wow, this is so good.
We can kickstart now.
Oh, yes.
Nicolae Bogdan Bratis, welcome back to the Never Mind the Job Spec podcast. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for traveling up to London.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, mate, I'm excited for this. This is the first time we've met in person, even though we've been working together since 2019.
Yep.
Crazy.
True. Yeah.
Crazy.
A lot of years. How many years is that? 5 years?
Yeah, exactly that.
And half a decade.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, exactly. Obviously, we met before the podcast, and you dropped some massive news on me, like, oh, didn't I tell you that? You're going to be a father.
Yes, I will.
In August. Yeah. Massive congrats, man. That's
maybe
amazing.
September, you never know. So
What's
it's
that?
at the end of August, maybe September, maybe.
You can never predict these things, right?
Yeah.
So shout out to Nicolae Jr.
Yes.
Perhaps, who's coming along.
Yeah, hello. He's going to see it in the future.
Yeah, exactly that. Oh, amazing. I mean, that's incredible. And I think it's a lovely way to kind of start the podcast, because what I wanted to do is just kind of cover some of the elements that we discussed in the first podcast, but actually really focus on what happened essentially we recorded that podcast in 2020.
Yep.
Now 2024.
COVID time, I believe, or something.
A lot of lives happened then.
Yeah.
Before we get into that, introduce yourself. Nicolae Bogdan Bratis, you are...
So I am a podcast producer. I am the director of Saspod. Saspod is a podcast production company that is based in the UK. I deal a lot with audio, video. Basically, I make sure that everybody sounds good. And that's me. I'm also a musician, of course. I play in a few bands. And this is a side project for me now at the moment. We're going to discuss about that. That's me.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that you start with, and obviously Saspod, because you are a musician first and foremost. I mean, hopefully people will go back and listen to that kind of first podcast recording. Finalist of Romania's X Factor, multi-instrumentalist, classically trained.
True.
Yeah, I mean, you start with the business because it's where your passion is now. But there's this whole kind of backstory from, and again, I'm not going to try and pronounce the name of your village in Transylvania, but
it's called Big Village, Satu Mare.
But you started, like I say, and I remember from our first conversation, there was a teacher that kind of started to shape your thinking around music, not just as an art form, but as a business. And just kind of go back over that for us. Just give us a little summary of that period of time when you started to really get into your music.
When I started playing music, I started playing piano. I was singing as well. This teacher from my town, Satu Mare, he was a great tutor. He helped me out with a lot of things. He was more of a mentor to me at the same time. I remember I was traveling with him, in the area, in the county I was living in, to help him out with equipment, to get speakers, connected. We were producing events, small events, but we were producing them. I was helping him out. I was around 14 at that time. And that's when I got introduced to the realm of audio, not just music. I started operating mixers. I started understanding what an XLR cable is, what a jack cable is, and so on. I was getting understanding what you need to do in this business in order to be professional. Even wrapping a cable, that's important how you do it, because you can break equipment very easily by doing it the wrong way. These things I took early on. And I realized that, music is not just music. It's not just you playing piano. It's not just you playing guitar. It's not busking. It's not necessarily playing in the front of an audience of, I don't know how many thousand people. It's also about what's happening around it as well, right? There's so many things that are happening in the music industry and now in the podcasting industry as well, because podcasting industry is an emerging market now for a lot of people to get into. So that's kind of like what that teacher like showed me in terms of what you can do with your life. Is there's so many avenues for you, right? So then I went to X Factor, and I did good there.
I was in the final.
Yeah, I got into the final. I was very young at that age. I was like, I wasn't even major. I was 17. And then I got 18 after the fact. And I remember I had to sign the contract for the show, and my mom had to sign for me as well. I couldn't do it by myself. It was great. It was an awesome experience because I realized, what the show business is. And literally there's so many things going on into a production like that. And after that, I actually didn't stop going to certain TV appearances in Romania. After that, I got into a band. I played with them. I was a singer in that band, but at some point they realized that I can play piano as well. So I did some keyboard playing for them as well, and I played in certain TV shows in there. And we had like, it was more of a job, like turning to that studio every single time, every day, and you would need to play like for 4 or 5 hours. You need a lot of patience because sometimes you may need to stay just there and watch the entire thing that happens on TV, and then you maybe need to play 2-3 songs within that 4 hours or something. So it was really fun as well. Yeah, and then at some point I decided to come here in the UK at Southampton Solent University. I got into popular music production there. It was a great course, and that further shaped my thinking into, music is not just, you playing an instrument or something like that. You can do so many things, and you can be very open to change and stuff like that. So I learned about building your own website. I learned about how you can finance your business, how you can do certain things to make sure that, build a business plan, stuff like that. A lot of musicians don't think about building a business plan, and you can build a business plan for your music as well. People like just wait for that miracle to happen to get into, to get a record label to sign them or get that million of views on YouTube or something like that. But you need a proper business plan. Even though you're an artist, you need to think as a business person, because otherwise you won't succeed.
The first thing I think of there, and I reflected on it, is that's a lot of life to live at a relatively young age, 17, 18, right? I mean, the level of notoriety and popularity you would have gained within Romania and maybe extended beyond that through X Factor, that might be a lot to cope with for somebody of a kind of similar age. And how did you manage to kind of keep balance?
Yeah, it's a strange thing, because in Romania, people recognize me on the street, of course, and they still recognize me. Some of the more like, people that really, really supported me, they still know me and they see me on the street, especially in my hometown. Because in my hometown, I was like on every single poster everywhere. And it was unprecedented that somebody from my hometown actually gets into the final of X Factor. Because X Factor in Romania was already 3 years in. I think I was on the 3rd season of X Factor Romania. Before that, we had another guy that went there as well. He did very well as well. He was into the Gales, like into the main show, but he didn't reach the final. He has an awesome voice, unfortunately, but it didn't happen. It was unprecedented for my hometown. So because of that, people started recognizing me a lot in my hometown, and also in Bucharest. I was still recognized 3-4 years after. But then once I moved to the UK, nobody recognized me. Actually, it was a strange thing. I'm not sure how that happened. When I got into the student accommodation, the guy from the reception, he told me, "I know you." And I said, "Wow." He said, "I know you. You're from X Factor." And I'm like, "You can't possibly know that." And he said, yeah, I know you. I'm not sure how. Maybe they looked maybe online, who am I? Maybe they do some sort of referencing. I don't know exactly. But somehow that guy knew who I am. Wow. I'm not sure how that happened. I really don't know.
It is. I mean, certainly in the UK, how much kind of publicity and marketing goes around the kind of X Factor. There's this whole kind of, storyboard of the journey, how the hometowns kind of get behind, certainly the finalists. Mm-hmm. And certainly 3 seasons in, it would have already built a profile and kind of lots of viewership.
Yeah.
And again, it's, knowing you as I do, you're so balanced and calm, and you have a very positive outlook on life. And I wondered, did, kind of 17, 18-year-old Nicolae have that same sort of balance? Or was it
No,
kind
it
of,
was
how did you keep
more.
yourself calm in the storm of everything that was happening around you?
I was calm in a sense that, I was focused on what I want to do, and I try not to get distracted by certain things that didn't make sense for me. So I try not to go into that frenzy, like going clubbing every day and stuff like that. I was doing the, every teenage person would do, but I wasn't doing anything that's extreme. But I I stayed in Bucharest. After that, I stayed in Bucharest, I believe, 2 years. So when I got once I turned 20, I moved to the UK, and that was a big change for me because now suddenly you're alone here. There's no support. My girlfriend was already here before, but she was 5 hours away from me. Like realistically, I was alone in Southampton. And I remember I stayed there for a few months already. I was four months in or something like that. I moved in September 2015, something like that. It was quite, it started like a bit of depression started to kick in, but it wasn't depression because I don't have problems with these kind of things. But I remember that it was a bit like that, adapting to the new way of, living, like different culture, different people. You don't speak your own native language, which is kind of like, and it was tough for me as well because, in Romania, a lot of people speak English very well, but, you really don't know until you actually go to the country how much you need to learn. Because, I had English lessons every maybe 3 times a week or something like that. I wasn't particularly into a course where you would learn English every day because there are certain things like that in Romania as well. But most people of my age, they speak English extremely well. I wasn't that guy, I wasn't that guy. I was like struggling. But once I got into the UK, I started like communicating more, and I was hanging out with everybody. It didn't matter. And then I started to see like people accepting me and stuff like that. And I started to get the hope back and started getting like used to the idea of living here. But it wasn't an easy transition. I would say like I got homesick very fast once I got here because a lot of things I was missing. Even like, for example, in Romania, you can buy a coffee for 50p.
Yeah.
And here you will need to pay £2.
Yeah.
Or £3.
Big difference.
A big difference.
Cost of living completely different.
And cost of living completely different. And I didn't have a job. So there was no job. So all the money I had with me were from savings that I got in Romania through playing. I remember I bought my MacBook Pro. I had a MacBook Pro with me, and that's what I had, and a bag of clothes. And with that, I managed to get myself together. I started playing in a band, and I was getting paid not very much, maybe £70 to £100 per gig or something like that. The typical pub gig. I got hired by the university to do a campus job, supervising the studio. So that helped me a little bit as well. And yeah, that was it basically. But it wasn't an easy transition at all. Like it took years to actually get used to the idea that now I live here normally, every day. Now, when I go back home, I feel great about going home. I stay there 2-3 weeks, and after that, I get homesick again from the UK. So it's weird. It's a weird thing. It's like you feel like you have multiple places you live, and it doesn't feel like you belong somewhere 100%. But at the same time, once you leave that place where you normally live, then you start getting homesick about that place and so on. So it's really weird.
Well, we were just talking about the Romanian kind of paste that you put into your sandwiches and stuff like that. And it's things like that, it's things like that when you
stuff,
from
stuff
home that you can access really easily, and it's really familiar and would give you that kind of sense of kind of home and grounding.
In Southampton, fortunately, in Southampton, we have a Romanian shop, which is really, really good. So you find everything from
How much
Romanian.
do you own of that shop? You probably invested into it.
I mean, not too much. The normal stuff that you would have at home, which you don't find in Lidl, for example, you can find there sometimes. There are certain particular things that, remind you of home and which you want to buy from time to time.
So there's a couple of things within that. And I mean, your ambition it is always strikes me as a driving factor. And we'll come to this in terms of how you went from obviously setting up what was originally Soren Sign, and now we have Saspod, a tech play there.
Yeah.
But that ambition to make something you love, which is kind of music and audio, into an actual commercial entity. And was that part of the driver for kind of moving to the UK? Because obviously that move is one thing. You can be like, okay, that's great. But something's got to sustain you to stay there, even in those periods where you feel kind of slightly isolated. And you don't really realize how much language is a barrier until it is a barrier. You know what I mean? And how you can be surrounded by people, but not really feel like you can kind of connect and communicate. So I just wonder whether music has always been that kind of solid, consistent thing that kind of keeps you grounded.
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, when I moved here, I tried to get into, I formed a band and I played quite a few gigs around Southampton. I actually played London a few times as well. And at the same time, I was playing in the other band as a session musician, as a keyboard player there. So I was involved in multiple musical projects, especially with the university as well and everything. But the reason I started my business was fortunately from music, like specifically from being in a band or doing stuff like that, you really, really, really can't sustain yourself, in my opinion, at a certain level. You really need to become like really, really famous to be able to actually get some decent money to live or to buy a property or to do any meaning, like anybody that would work in a corporate environment or would work, would own a business or something like that. You really can't do that from music. Not for me. It didn't happen. Like certain circumstances happened in my life. I need to move from one place to another, like from one part of Southampton to another one in the city center. I decided to move central because everything was closer. I don't drive. So for me, that was very important. And I had to find a way to make some money. I finished university and that job wasn't there anymore. So I remember a discussion I had with somebody that came at uni to talk about his business and stuff like that. And I talked to him specifically at some point, and he told me, first thing first, he said that he lived in Romania for 2 years. So that already I had a connection with him there. He's a British guy, and he told me he has a record label. Record label is called, I believe, Phantom Limp or something like that. I know it's weird name, but it's like an indie record label or something like that. And I explained, look, I have a lot of skills. I can do so many things. I put all my skills into my music. I try to promote my music, but of course, my music, it's a product that nobody knows as much, and it's quite hard to actually get money to promote your music and stuff like that. So how do I navigate that? And I told him, like, look, I'm also a producer. I can work with audio. I can do so many things. And he said, do things separate, like in parallel. You can do things at the same time. You don't necessarily need to focus in only one direction. You can do multiple things at the same time and see what works. That kind of like broke that wall or that closed mindset that I need to do only that specific thing to succeed, which is totally false. Because in order to become somebody, you need to have different experiences, and sometimes those experiences make you a very unique person that could make a difference in the world. So you could be like, for example, do certain things that are completely unrelated to each other. Today you're a musician and tomorrow you're working, I don't know, in a finance company. And now you have a mixture of skills that you can use to maybe do your dream job or do something that you always wanted. So then I decided to go in towards that direction. I created the website. The name was So and Sign. I got inspiration for that from the synthesizers that I was using, because I'm a synthesizer guy. I can use synthesizers for my music to create certain sounds and stuff. So there are certain waveforms, we call them, that you can use. And so I said, So and Sign, that sounds quite cool. I know it's a bit of a mouthful, but that's what I came up with. So I didn't think twice. I bought the domain and I created a website, and then I started looking for clients very early on. I found Glenn actually as a client. He gave me a few podcasts, I remember, in the beginning.
Those early podcasts, man.
Yeah,
the early podcasts. Now.
Yeah, that's fine. So I started like doing that. A lot of people were approaching me because I started the business before COVID, and then COVID hit in, and a lot of people had problems with audio, so they wanted to get it fixed. So I started working with quite a few businesses and stuff like that, and I realized, wow, this is so good because I can put my skills to good use and people actually want them. So I started developing this even more. So I started hiring people. I started providing more services, not just audio production, also video production. So I started doing multiple things. And now I said, look, So and Sign, it's a bit hard to pronounce. So let's change this to something else and rebrand it a little bit, because I saw that there's a struggle in the podcasting industry. The organization aspect of it's not there. So many studios, so many people work with so many tools like Google Drive, Slack, Asana for managing a project, so many tools, hosting for your podcast. There's so many providers that you use. You spend a lot of money to actually get those providers. I decided to build a tool that is specifically tailored to podcasting to manage your podcast. So that's what Saspod does at the moment. So we have podcast hosting. There's a podcast management platform that we release. We actually released it in beta version this week, which is really good. And me and Glenn will try today to upload this podcast there and to start producing it. Yeah.
Oh man, amazing. And it's kind of so just kind of thinking about that kind of early decision where you were like, okay, well, if I separate out what Bratis, which is obviously the musical project,
mm-hmm.
and then Saw and Sign becomes, a business proposition.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that we were connected by a kind of mutual friend, and she said to me, she was like, this guy knows what he's doing. And he will be very helpful and direct with you in terms of how to kind of create your kind of podcast sound. And I just reflect back to what I said there, which I cringe in terms of those early podcasts. It's less about the kind of guests and the quality of the conversation or my quite shit interviewing technique, but more about the sound quality.
Mm-hmm.
And we were kind of talking about this in so much as you can kind of engage a kind of quote unquote podcast producing service, but what they get with you is it's the coaching,
mm-hmm.
it's the advice, it's the healthy challenge. Like some of the times when I've come up with this idea and you're like, yeah, that's really great, Glenn, but
yeah,
it doesn't work in this context. And if you approach it from a service point of view, there's a chance that somebody will just be like, okay, cool, we'll do that,
mm-hmm.
and just charge you for it.
Yeah.
Whereas with you're like, you are really passionate about creating the best possible end product, and you care about that. So it's not just a service for you, it's not
mm-hmm.
just a business,
mm-hmm.
it's an extension of who you are. It's kind of like, I care about the quality of this. I
mm-hmm.
want you to have the best version of this podcast
mm-hmm.
that you can have. And if I have to challenge you and all these kind of consultation elements, they're all free. I mean, you're not charging people
yep.
for it. You're like, okay, let's jump on a call. And I've said before, you're always working.
Yeah.
I mean, you're just kind of like, you are the atypical founder.
It's good.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, you're really super passionate about it, but you're always there to support. And I think the kind of beauty of that is people really get a sense of you through now what is Saspod and what was formerly Saw and Sign. And I kind of feel like that extension of you and your passion, because I always refer to you as the kind of audio magician, right? It's kind of almost, I mean, some of the recordings I've sent over to you and you've managed to make them sound halfway decent where I've been tapping the mic or something's dropped or something along those lines. And I just kind of, how do you sustain that kind of passion? I mean, what challenges? Because I mean, you're extremely skilled and experienced now. Are there certain sort of things that you're looking for when you're producing a kind of podcast? Are there certain challenges you want that kind of keep you stimulated and kind of excited?
There's a lot of challenges when producing a podcast. Typical challenges where the client, for example, may, buy a microphone and they start recording and they realize that it doesn't sound good. Usually that's when they get to me. Where they realize that, this doesn't sound good. Like, what should I do? I have this microphone. I know how to use it, I believe, but something is not proper. And most of the people I work with are business entrepreneurs, maybe, communication departments, marketing departments, like stuff like that. And these people are not skilled into audio. Like that's not their job. So they are looking for somebody like me to help them out. First thing first, to understand the equipment they record with. And there is this aspect of recording, creating your own studio in your office, for example, or your home. Obviously, you can rent a studio like this one to get it done, and you have a professional to set it up for you. But many times that's not possible because bookings are not available, and you want to get that specific personality to your podcast and stuff like that. And it's easier to record in your home or in your office, for example. Things also remote recording now. It's also a thing that a lot of people struggle with. They want to make sure that it sounds as good as possible, and it's harder to actually manage something, remotely, because you really can't see if that cable is plugged in correctly into the computer or stuff like that. So you need to kind of like think outside the box to communicate with the people and tell them, look, you need to do this and that. Sometimes you need to create some guides for the client to understand what they need to do. So there's so many challenges. So that's where I come into place, as well as Saspod, is to help them out. And I don't like the idea of, just having a client sending some files to me, and if they sound bad, to say, oh yeah, we do it. Because at the end of the day, the client wants from this podcast to, drive maybe customers to his business, or leads, or wants to get his personal branding sorted, or stuff like that. If this doesn't sound good, none of these objectives are fulfilled. So then what I need to do is to ensure that they do it right from the beginning, so they don't get disappointed at the end, because then we both lose, right? So I make sure I push them, like that healthy challenge, like you said. I push them to ensure that their podcast sound as good as possible. If they don't have a budget, or the budget is quite low, I tell them like what's the best way to do it on that budget, for example. And I make them understand the way things work, So that's what I do. Then there's also the post-production side of it, where if the podcast was recorded properly, even though maybe there are certain mistakes, but at least there are not as many mistakes, we can post-produce it, and we can remove noise from the recording. We can make it look better. We can do color grading. We can do also all sorts of things to make sure that the quality of the production is there.
It kind of, what I always kind of experience from you is that kind of coaching through. Mm-hmm. It's kind of almost like, okay, we've achieved X on this podcast, so for the next one, maybe try this, maybe think about that in terms of the setup. I always really appreciated that, because it's ultimately, kind of like you're trying to with each kind of podcast, you're trying to get it to a point where it's really that optimum. Because we were talking about it when we were walking around here. Most clients will come to you and be like, hey, I want my podcast to sound like, let's say Stephen Bartlett or something along those lines. Well, they've got tens of thousands of pounds to invest in a podcast production setup and marketing and everything along those lines. Yeah. So if that's your benchmark, and sometimes, clients will come to you with that kind of benchmark, you're like, okay, cool. Well, we're probably not going to get there yet, but these are the things you can do to kind of try and achieve that kind of quality of sound. And I think for you, one of the things that you always were really kind of keen on was, don't replicate other people. Try and find your kind of your kind of character, your sound, your approach. And I always really respected that, because it was kind of, when you start podcasting, it's kind of right. I mean, you're quite vulnerable, right? Because you probably don't think you're very good. There's a degree of imposter syndrome, and you're just kind of trying to take those first few steps. And it's really important to have somebody kind of co-piloting you, being like, okay, cool, that works. These bits can be improved, and this is what we'll do for the next one. And that, for me, goes beyond, quote unquote, a service to what you're about as a person. And I wrote this down because it kind of always resonates with me, is your positive mindset. You're always positive. Where does that come from?
I attracted a lot of great things in my life being positive. That's what I feel. So being positive for me is like, obviously sometimes I'm also upset, or like I'm a bit worried, or I have a little bit of anxiety. But the idea is that, what's the worst that can happen, most of the time. So if you start a podcast, for example, and it failed and it didn't work, the worst is maybe you lost some money because you invested into this project. Of course, there's a financial thing, but you got the content out there. So there's something out there for you, for people to see and stuff like that. You went into that direction because you wanted to create, you want it through your marketing efforts to promote something, right? To promote yourself or to promote a business or something like that. Things take time. And the positive mindset is just the way I am. It's like that's how I've been since I was young. And I'm a dreamer. I like to dream about what is going to happen in the next month or in the next year, 10 years from now. I like to have a vision of things that happen, and I feel like that. And when things happen, that's a confirmation that what I've done is great. And if it doesn't happen, then I say, what do I need to do to make it happen? So I'm not stopping. I still go forward and I do it until it happens. So that's what I do.
You say dreamer, I say you're visualizing. You're visualizing your future. Because if we rewind to kind of X Factor, I remember you saying this as well. Like, you arrived at X Factor, there was lots of people there that was good, or perhaps, maybe musically a bit more mature than you, but you knew you could win, or you knew you could definitely compete with them.
Yeah.
And I think that confidence and that competitiveness and that ability to kind of visualize what the end goal could look like feeds into that positive mindset, right? Because then you can kind of look past perhaps today's challenge, which is something, and look past that to the goal. So you're like, oh, well, I can get past today's challenge because that's where I'm heading. And I think that's the thing that really kind of I reflected on with you. And that I wonder whether that fed into your kind of positive mindset, that you can see beyond the day-to-day challenge because there's a bigger picture that
you have to take the time, like throughout the day. You have to take the time to. A lot of people say journal, or a lot of people, like so many people I hear about, talking about journaling in podcasting and stuff like that. But you need to take the time every day to kind of like think about what you do now, what you've accomplished, and what you want to do in the future, because that's going to kind of like drive you forward. If you don't have a goal, if you don't have like a vision, then basically you live just a day-to-day life without an aim, and there's nothing to make you like go forward. There's like you're gonna stay in the same place. So for example, let's say you've got this amount of clients now and you work with them and you say, okay, that's good enough for me. Okay, that could be, but if you're that type of person that is like, okay, now I've got these clients, like what's next? And then you get this amount of clients and you do that thing, that you introduce that service and you introduce that platform, and you're thinking now, what's next? And some people live on that. I think I got that from my mom. My mom is the same. So my mom can't stay still. Like she's literally like, she owns a restaurant. She runs a restaurant in Greece, and she's always looking for that improvement. She's never like able to sit like, okay, now this works. Now I'm just sitting here to see how things go. Yeah. No, she's always like, okay, now we change this, now we change that, and we make it better. So I'm like the same. I'm exactly the same.
Yeah, that kind of ambition and work ethic, right? Because these things don't happen without the work ethic. And I come back to that point around you always kind of being available to work. Yeah. You have a work ethic because it's driven by the passion and that kind of visualization. And I got it's wow. I mean, if you think about the timing of this conversation now, right? You're about to move to a new country. Let's be fair. I mean, you're moving to Scotland.
Different country.
you're going to become a father. So basically, now you're moving your family to a new country. What is the plan there? What's kind of, because obviously Saspod will continue as a business
because it's remote. It's at least
so.
global,
What's the kind of the next vision?
Yeah, it's exciting stuff. I lived in Southampton for about almost 8 years, I would say. Yeah, if I'm thinking right, 8 years. So it's almost a decade. It's more than I lived in Bucharest. So in Bucharest, I felt like home already there. And I would say Southampton is kind of like, it's the place where I lived, most of my adult life so far. So that's great. But now, going to Glasgow, moving there, first thing first, I managed to buy my own property, which is great. And it's going to help me out to fulfill my dreams and do everything. So there's a lot of space and everything. So that's great. Yeah, going there, there's literally no plan 100%, obviously, because it's a new place. Exactly the same as I moved from Bucharest to Southampton. It was a leap of faith to go there. It's the same with this. I feel for me, that place is gonna serve me a little bit better because it's a bigger city than Southampton. Obviously, Southampton is very close to London, but commuting, like even today, for example, coming in see Glenn, it's not the easiest thing. And I don't drive again. Maybe I'm gonna get my driving license this year. I'll see if I can manage to squeeze that in. Yeah, Glasgow is a big city. It has 2 international airports there: Edinburgh Airport, Glasgow Airport. I want to travel a bit more. I want to see people around the world. I want to, see other countries and stuff like that. Yeah, it's a very musical city as well. There's so many venues where you can play. Probably I've heard from some people that there's not a lot of keyboard players there, so there's not a lot of competition to get myself into a project there, a musical project, because I'll definitely need to get into one of those to keep myself sane. It's going to be easier for me to operate my business from there as well, because I have more space, of course. Nowadays, businesses are operating not necessarily from an office or things like. A lot of founders, they start their business from their home. Fortunately, I'm going to have a space in the back garden, which is a nice office space that I'm going to use as well. So that's good. So I'm going to build my studio there. And obviously, I'm going to be a father. I want my kid to have a great environment to develop into. There's not a lot of planning involved there. It's literally a bit of like a target and see what hits, where you hit.
Well, there is definitely some plans there. And I know it's kind of, I think the beauty is obviously Saspod is a core part of kind of what you've built and will continue to.
And it's remote. That's the thing.
Yeah.
I can work from any part of the world. It doesn't matter where it is. I could be in. Sometimes I would take a vacation.
Yeah.
In Greece, that my mom stayed there for 2 months and work from there and operate my business from there. So there's not necessarily like, I need to be in a certain place to do my work. So my life revolves around online most of the time. Most of the people I talk to are, online. I actually attended a business event in Glasgow while I was viewing properties around Glasgow, and I met some lovely people already there. So I'm going to kind of like try to connect with them a little bit more. So it's really good. I know that there's a bit of there's a need for studios there, for example, for podcasts and stuff like that. So probably I'm going to try to get into that as well. But yeah.
I mean, that sounds like you've got a fair bit of planned already, you know what I mean?
Roughly, it's not on paper. It's just,
it's there though.
In my mind.
It's there. And it sounds like the start of an incredible journey for you and your family. And again, massive congrats, man. Seriously. It's incredible news and super excited for you. So Saspod, fast forward 24 months, 2 years. What does Saspod look like then?
In the moment, we managed to release the podcast management platform. So far until now, we had the podcast hosting, which Glenn is part of as well. And basically, podcast host would do any podcast host would distribute the podcast to all the different platforms. So that's kind of like what we rolled out with at the beginning of actually last year in the summer. So now this year we are finishing the podcast management platform. It's already released, like it's already available to the clients, and we're starting onboarding most of our clients there to beta test. Obviously, there's a few things that need to be tweaked here and there. Once we finish with that, we're probably gonna get into more like merging these two together, the podcast hosting and the podcast management platform, even more, and help out our clients to manage the podcast even better, like probably introduce AI show notes, transcriptions, all that fancy stuff. We're going to probably get into the video podcasting as well, helping clients create reels in a more automated way. That's very exciting. Definitely, we want to get into the monetization part of the podcast. It's quite hard to monetize podcasts at the moment, so definitely you need to partner with sponsor of some sort. If you run your podcast on YouTube, you know how YouTube kind of like monetizes your podcast. It takes time. Some podcasts, they may be, I had a discussion with a client. The podcast is quite sensitive. You need to censor a lot in order to get monetized and stuff like that. So probably, monetizing on YouTube is not an option for everybody. So we're going to try to see how we can solve that issue as well. There's so many things to be done. Yeah, but we'll definitely reach there. So 2 years from now, I would say definitely Saspod is going to be kind of like a place where people will feel that, look, I go there, I know that I get my problem solved. So that's what I want. Already, that's happening, but there are certain things that we are still need to incorporating here and there to make that happen. We haven't pushed any marketing just yet. We haven't like promoted too much. Clients that we have or kind of like coming to us from referrals or finding us online. Once I feel confident investing into marketing makes sense, then we're going to start investing in the marketing and bring this platform to a great level.
And it's interesting because obviously what Saspod or what you're planning for Saspod is very much an integrated platform, because I know from my own,
that's the idea.
Yeah. My own experience, like, you've kind of got the likes of Buzzsprout where you can kind of distribute off, but that point around sponsors, there's almost like aggregators for that now. So sign up to this and you can access sponsors for your podcast, etc.
Exactly.
I mean, it's really difficult to kind of, I guess, focus and find the information across all of these different things when it's different distribution platforms or different software. So actually bringing that together, that's really ambitious.
Yeah, it's really ambitious. It's a lot. There's so many things that need to be done in order for that to happen. Of course, there's a lot of competition as well. Not as much as in other industries, but I feel that the way we do it is great. I'm blessed to have a great team that works on the development of the platform. Fortunately, I'm able to talk to them every day to make sure that everything is done right. Like we start tweaking like little things to make sure that everything is 100%. I mean, the platform looks great and it works great. I really want also from this platform, the customer to feel like, look, like you said, this I'm taken care of. I'm not coming to Saspod and I'm like sign up to this package or do that and then I'm getting ignored. That's something that I really hate, especially, for example, for me as a customer myself to other businesses. Sometimes you feel that, personal touch in the beginning and then starts to fade away. So that's something that I really don't want to happen. So definitely we're going to ensure that there's like people in place that really take care of the podcast and make sure that they grow it. We may get into the social media marketing aspect of it as well, because to make a podcast grow, you need to push a lot on social media, and that's part of creating an audience and stuff like that. So what I love about podcasting is that you can create content really fast. So we discuss here for an hour and then we produce it. And then from this discussion, we've got so many takeaways and so many things that we discussed, which is great, like all sorts of tips. Yeah, that's why a lot of people make podcasts, because it's like the content is raw, it's vulnerable, like you said. And that really kind of like makes other people, when they look at this podcast, trust the business more, trust the person more. It kind of like builds that trust. So.
Wow, amazing. And this is all being kind of bootstrapped at the moment, right? This is self-funded, right?
Yeah.
So you're looking for investors at all?
To be fair, I'm not sure if that would be a great time. I do invest everything myself at the moment, and that's what I'm doing now. And I like the idea of owning 100% of your company.
Yeah.
I
thought you might say that.
Yeah, it feels great. I have a lot of experience, so I want to make sure that the way this is built, especially in the infancy stage, is the right way. And the funds, fortunately, I'm blessed with great clients. Most of the money that gets into the business gets reinvested into the business. Obviously, that's what the tax man wants as well.
Yeah,
so definitely you have to
reinvest.
You have to reinvest to know you don't pay too much tax, and I do that.
Yeah.
So that's really, really good. Yeah. So it's self-funded. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, and I think so. Once Saspod comes out of kind of beta testing, I mean, and just for clarity, right? This is a platform that people can access globally. I mean, it's it's quite legit. I mean, it's not like UK centric. It's something that people can access globally.
Yeah, I do like working with people from the UK because obviously we live in the same geographical area and it's easy to collaborate. But we have clients from all over the world, like Australia, the US, Italy, Switzerland. So people from all over the world. Obviously, the podcast needs to be in English because the editors, the people that edit the podcast, they speak only English. So that's the agency part of the business as well, because we have that as well. So we do produce podcasts as well, which is literally like we work on the podcast, we make sure that it looks great, but we also have the tech as well, which is helping us to, create a better experience for the client. So that's why I created that.
the sheer fact that you're producing kind of podcasts from different locations already, I would imagine that's probably on your roadmap, kind of multilingual podcasts, kind of like.
I mean, there's a big. I do have a podcast in Italian that I edit personally.
Yeah.
I don't speak Italian at all.
Yeah.
The client knows the limitation of the service because I told them, look, I can clean up the recording for you, but I really can't edit content out.
Yeah.
So I do that for them, and I realized that they want to work with me because really there's not a lot of businesses in other languages that actually do that. So maybe in the future that could be a possibility as well. You never know. It depends. I would say like second language that podcast is very popular. Maybe two, like Spanish and Arabic. Like those places, especially like, for example, podcasts in Dubai. For example, there's so many podcasts that are happening there. Also in Spain, and the entire world that speaks Spanish. It's a lot of opportunity there, but I'm not quite there yet. So
yeah, exactly. I was just thinking actually, if we fast forward kind of 2 years, your son will be about 18 months old.
Yeah,
man,
he's gonna be a musician.
Yeah, I was going to say
whatever he wants to be, but
he's definitely going to grow up in a musical household.
Music
right?
is going to be around all the time. That's how I live. That's how I got into music in a way as well, because my parents were always surrounding my music as well. My mom especially, and the family from my mom, they were always like surrounding my music, and that's why I got into it as well. So I want my kid to feel the same, kind of like, and it's a nice childhood. Once you get into that, you really feel like you have a focus on something, and it's a passion. And it's nice to have a passion from when you're really young, because there's some people, like some kids that unfortunately they really can't find what they love, what they like doing. And that's a problem, because that makes them aimless and they end up doing things that shouldn't be done at that age. It's great to be focused on something. I remember when I was a kid, instead of like, I don't know, wasting time with kids outside. I mean, I was having my social life as well, and was getting out with people as well. But most of the time I was spent, indoors learning piano. And if I would do some socializing with kids of my age, it would be probably within a controlled, like let's say at a course of some sort. We would play together, maybe in a vocal band or something like that. And then afterwards, we're going to get out for a coffee or something like that. But it would not be something that, what other kids may do, just losing time and doing nothing,
The one thing's for sure, he's going to be born into a very positive household.
Yeah.
Musical household. And by the sounds of it, pretty big house with an amazing garden.
Yeah, I mean, it's not huge garden, but it's enough for me.
When you've had no garden, any garden is amazing.
Yeah.
But genuinely,
Glasgow is not known for sunshine, but I stayed there for a few days already at the property, and to be fair, like it was quite warm outside. It was quite nice, sunshine. I actually got a bit of a tan. I'm not sure if you see. It's true, Glasgow tan.
Wow, now that is impressive.
It's
that
impressive.
Is definitely you being positive, thinking there's going to be lots of.
It's true. It's true. I actually stayed outside a little bit, and then I thought, whoa! I started getting burned a little bit.
Well, let's see. Let's see in 2 years' time whether you continue to keep up that Glasgow tan.
Imagine that.
Imagine that. But genuinely, I mean, what a really perfect way to end the podcast. Two things. One, congratulations on becoming a father, and congratulations and continued success with Saspod. Nicolae Bogdan Bratis, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much, Glenn. Thank you. Thank you, everyone listening to this podcast.